Hi, Studio Recap here. Today, we're going to talk about a movie called Insidious, the red door in the thriller and horror genres. Spoiler alert is on, watch out and take care. You won't believe how much your support means. Thank you so much for your support. The movie begins with a scene where a man named Josh Lambert and his young son Dalton have their memories erased by Dr. Carl to make sure they don't remember anything. A time jump takes us 9 years into the future. Josh and his family are attending his mother's funeral. We learn that Josh and his wife Renee are divorced. After the ceremony, Josh tries to talk to Dalton, and it's clear that their father-son relationship is strained. Renee suggests that Josh should take Dalton to his university dorm, hoping it will improve their connection. Renee sees Dr. Carl leaving the funeral. At this point, we notice that Josh doesn't even remember Dr. Carl, he only vaguely feels like he's seen him before. Josh texts Dalton asking, "Would you like me to take you to college?" Dalton agrees. Meanwhile, we see a shadowy figure in the back of Josh's car. Josh and Dalton head to the university together. While looking through Dalton's sketches, Josh notices a drawing of his mother. Dalton comments that it seems like his grandmother had been hiding something for a long time. Dalton puts up his drawings on the wall in his dorm room, but none of them include Josh. Josh tells Dalton that he hasn't been in a good place over the past few years and regrets neglecting his kids. At this moment, Dalton's roommate, Chris Winslow, enters. Contrary to the name, Chris turns out to be a girl. Chris leaves them alone to continue their conversation. A heated argument breaks out between Josh and Dalton, ending with Josh storming off in frustration. Chris and Dalton play a game to get to know each other. Dalton reveals that when he was 10 years old, he was in a coma for a year and doesn't remember anything from that time, not even being sick. Chris turns off the lights, but Dalton is scared of the dark and quickly turns on a nightlight. The next day, Dalton attends his first class with Professor Oregon. The professor asks everyone to show their favorite artwork. The students start sharing their best pieces. The professor criticizes one student's painting for being too simple and asks him to tear it up. When the student refuses, the professor kicks him out of class. As the professor continues speaking, Dalton suddenly tears up his drawing of his grandmother. The professor asks why he destroyed such a good piece and praises him for it. She tells the class that to create art, they must deeply explore their memories. She then instructs everyone to delve into their minds as she counts down. This exercise triggers some of Dalton's buried memories. He sketches a door, and while drawing, he cuts his hand. Meanwhile, Josh, who seems increasingly anxious and unwell, visits a doctor for an MRI. During the procedure, the lights suddenly go out. Josh presses the emergency button, asking to be let out, but no one responds. A shadowy figure appears behind him, reaching out toward him. Josh notices the figure, but when he looks up, it's gone. Suddenly, he sees a terrifying figure in hospital clothing crawling toward him, and he panics. The MRI ends, and Josh is let out. He asks the doctor who the figure was. The doctor tells him he was asleep for 15 minutes and assures him that he is physically fine, suggesting his issues might be stress-related or due to family problems. Meanwhile, Dalton tries to clean the blood off his sketch, but the more he wipes, the more it spreads. He puts the drawing up on the wall, and as he stares at it, the lights in his room suddenly go out. Dalton connects his disc lamp to a power generator, and as soon as he turns it on, the room fills with a red glow. He notices blood on the lamp and then sees Chris's bedsheet covered in blood. When he approaches it, a horrifying figure appears, terrifying him. At that moment, Chris returns to the room and turns on the lights. Dalton realizes there's no sign of blood anywhere. Dalton and Chris decide to attend a party hosted by a guy named Nick. After some time, they get bored and seek into one of the rooms, which turns out to be Nick's. Chris leaves the room briefly. Dalton hears noises coming from the bathroom and investigates. He finds a boy inside, vomiting. The boy, who is actually a tormented spirit, asks Dalton to close the door. Frightened, Dalton hears Nick approaching and quickly hides under the bed. Nick enters the bathroom, but the spirit is no longer there. Nick turns off the lights and leaves the room. Dalton crawls out from under the bed, but the terrifying spirit reappears and vomits on him. Chris arrives just in time and finds Dalton in a terrible state. Dalton asks her to leave with him immediately. Nick walks in again, and to distract him, Chris kisses Dalton, pretending they were making out. Nick makes an inappropriate joke about Chris, and she angrily kicks him before they both quickly escape. Dalton is working on his painting, but after a while, he feels dizzy and falls asleep. The lights in the room go out. When he wakes up, he looks around and sees a light that turns on when he touches it. He walks toward the door, but as soon as he looks back, he sees himself sitting in the chair. Dalton heads to Chris's new room. When Chris turns on the lights, Dalton flees, being chased by an entity. He runs back to his room, and suddenly there's a loud knock. We see Dalton back in his room, and an angry Chris confronts him. Dalton explains everything to Chris, saying it all started in his painting class. He doesn't even know how he ended up in Chris's room tonight. Dalton feels like he's getting closer to figuring something out. The next day, Josh, who is severely distracted, is doing an exercise with pictures of his loved ones. Suddenly, he panics when he sees a man the same face we saw in the graveyard. Terrified, Josh tries to escape the spirit, but the entity keeps closing in on him. Josh faints while running, and when he wakes up, he sees a box labeled Ben Burton. Meanwhile, Josh's spirit returns to his body. He opens the box and realizes that Ben was a psychiatric patient. Inside, he finds photos of Ben with his mother. On the other hand, Dalton calls his brother Foster and asks him about the red door he remembers from their childhood. Foster says he doesn't know anything about it. Chris comes to Dalton and says she's discovered through her online research that he's not crazy, he has a supernatural ability. She explains this phenomenon allows his spirit to leave his body and travel freely while he sleeps. Chris plays a video of Dr. Elise Rainier for Dalton. After watching the video, Dalton tells Chris he wants to communicate with the spirit that told him to close the door in Nick's house. They decide to sneak into Nick's room again. Chris turns off all the lights while Dalton falls asleep. When Chris sees the door opening, she realizes it's Dalton's spirit, leaving her stunned. Dalton enters Nick's bathroom, and we see that Nick can't see him. The lights go out, and Chris discovers the door is locked. She tries to wake Dalton up. The spirit tells Dalton to close the door, leading to a confrontation. Meanwhile, in the real world, Chris is attacked by a demonic entity. She's knocked unconscious, but Dalton manages to return to his body and saves her. Josh investigates Ben's records and discovers that Ben was his missing father. Ben suffered from schizophrenia and mental health issues. Seeing his father's photo, Josh realizes he's the same man who has haunted him since childhood. Dalton apologizes to Chris, but she says she doesn't want to be involved in this anymore. Dalton calls Foster, asking him to share anything he remembers about their coma experience. Foster recalls him being trapped in a basement, though their mother always said it wasn't real. Dalton rushes to his room, completes his painting, and realizes the man attacking with the hammer is his father. Josh visits Renee and tells her about his father's story, showing her the notes Ben left for his mother. It seems Ben wanted to protect Josh by taking his own life. Dalton texts Chris, telling her he wasn't in coma and wants to uncover everything. He sits in front of his painting. A shadowy entity blows out a candle, plunging the room into darkness. Meanwhile, Ray confesses the truth to Josh. She and his mother erased Josh and Dalton's memories to protect them. Josh blames her, but Renee explains that he subconsciously harmed them and tried to kill them, which is why she divorced him to protect the kids. Foster shows the painting Dalton sent him to Josh and Renee, explaining Dalton's situation. They're terrified. Dalton sees the hammer from his painting come to life and grabs it. Suddenly, he finds himself in the basement of their house. Dalton sees his younger self and Foster as their mother tries to calm them down. Josh storms into the basement, furious, scaring everyone. Watching this, Dalton tries to save his younger self and attacks Josh. They struggle, and Dalton wakes up in terror only to face a demon trying to strangle him. Dalton has figured everything out. He wakes up again and returns to his body. Chris comes to check on him, bringing a light with her. When she turns it on, Dalton tells her he's no longer afraid of the dark. At this moment, we see Dalton has been possessed. Dalton leaves the room, Chris follows, only to be horrified when she sees him in the corner of the room. Dalton attacks her. Meanwhile, in the other realm, Josh faces a demonic entity. He finds Dalton and tries to rescue him, explaining that the spirits have taken over their bodies. Chris tries to turn on the lights, but the monster stops her. Dalton and Josh try to escape the other realm, with a monstrous entity chasing them. Josh closes the door and urges Dalton to leave. Josh is ready to face the monster to save his son. Meanwhile, demons approach Dalton's body in the real world. But just as they get close, Dalton wakes up, and all the entities disappear. Josh's heartbeat slows. In the other realm, paint drips down the walls as Dalton covers the door with paint in the real world. His painting has become a manifestation of reality. The monster attacks Josh, but suddenly hides behind the paint. Josh sees an image of his father smiling at him. He forgives his father. Josh wakes up, relieved to find everyone safe. The next day, Renee reconciles with Josh and invites him to gather as a family again. We see Josh and Dalton's relationship finally mending.